positively nothing until you receive a special delivery letter, read the telegram addressed to Perry Parker at the family home of 1631 South Wilton Place in Los Angeles during the evening of December the 15th, 1927. It would have struck fear and anxiety into both the father and mother, Geraldine, who were the parents of 12-year-old daughter Marion, who had gone missing earlier in the day. Soon after the first, a second telegram arrived. This one read, "Marion secure. Use good judgment. Interference with my plans dangerous." What unfolded was one of the most truly horrific 1920s crimes in California, with child abduction, ransom, coercion, and murder becoming a parent's worst nightmare. The Los Angeles Times would call it the most horrifying of the decade, and it is still remembered as one of the most brutal, shocking, and cruel crimes in American history. The day had begun as normal for 12-year-old Mary and her twin sister Marjorie and brother Perry Jr. as they headed off to school at Mount Vernon Junior High School, located in the Lafayette area of the city. Sometime during the afternoon, a well-dressed, well-spoken young man arrived at the school office and introduced himself as Mr. Cooper, an employee of the bank where Perry Parker Sr. worked. He politely informed the school registrar, Mary Holt, that he was there to pick up the Parker girl. Mr. Cooper explained that his employer, Perry Parker, had been in a bad car accident and was asking for his daughter. When Holt asked, "Which one?" the man hesitated, being surprised to learn that Marion had a twin sister, neither of whose names he actually knew. Despite this, the registrar excused Marion from class, and the school secretary, Naomi Flinton, brought the child to the office and allowed her to leave with the stranger. Assuring her he would take her straight to her father, the man took Marion to his car, where she climbed into the passenger seat, and they drove off together. Unknown to the school's staff, Perry Parker had suffered no accident at all and was still at work. Holt later claimed that she never would have let Marion go, but for the apparent sincerity and disarming manner of the man. It was only when Marjorie returned home without her sister that her mother Geraldine began to worry, immediately calling the girl's classmates and friends, but no one had seen Marion. Concern quickly turned to fear later that evening when Perry Parker received the telegram. A short while after the first message, a second telegram arrived which read, "Marion secure. Use good judgment. Interference with my plans dangerous." It was signed Marion Parker and George Fox, the latter presumably another alias. The family immediately contacted the school registrar, who explained what had happened, with the man calling himself Mr. Cooper. It rapidly became clear that Parker had no knowledge of the individual, who was most certainly not an employee of the bank, and he had certainly not sent anyone to retrieve his daughter from the school. Realizing Marion had been abducted, and that the child had been targeted because of her father's senior job at the bank, Parker called the police. Officers arrived promptly at the Parker home and took down a detailed description of the missing girl. Marion was 4'6" tall, about 100 pounds, and had been wearing an English print dress and brown Oxford shoes. Her straight dark brown hair was in a bob, and she looked nearly identical to her twin, Marjorie. Also recorded was a description of the man who had posed as Mr. Cooper, a white male, between 25 and 30 years old, around 5'8" and 150 pounds, dressed in a greyish-brown overcoat, black shoes, and a dark hat. The descriptions were hurriedly circulated to the press. Chief of Detectives Herman Klein ordered every available officer to join the investigation, expressing grave concern for Marion's safety. Her parents grew increasingly frantic as the hours passed, with no news. The next morning, a ransom letter arrived demanding $15,000 in $20 gold certificates for the child's safe return. The following morning, a letter arrived at the Parkers' home with instructions on how to hand over the ransom and signed as Fate. It included a postscript in Marion's handwriting, which said, "Daddy, please do what this man tells you, or he'll kill me if you don't. Your loving daughter, Marion Parker." The kidnapper instructed Parker to deliver the ransom to the corner of 10th Street and Gramercy Place. Desperate to save his daughter, Parker followed the directions exactly, especially the warning to avoid police involvement. Unknown to him, officers had been monitoring the Parker home and followed him to the meeting point. The kidnapper realized that Parker was being followed and fled before the exchange could take place, leaving the father waiting in vain for several hours. After the failed handover, additional messages from the kidnapper insisted that Marion was still alive, at least for now. He claimed she had seen him during the botched exchange and had wondered why her father didn't help her. He then told Parker to wait for a telephone call and warned him once again to keep the police well away. Through the telegram correspondence, a meeting location was established in the late hours of December the 16th. Parker to exchange the ransom. Prior to departing, he recorded the serial numbers of each of the certificates so they could be identified when used in future exchanges, allowing the authorities to track down the kidnapper. Throughout the next day, the family home received numerous further telegrams from the kidnapper, the first of which scolded Parker over the national press attention that Marion's kidnapping had received, as well as for allowing police to spy upon their planned exchange. In the telegram, the kidnapper indicated that December the 17th was the last day before he killed Marion. An attached letter, written in Marion's handwriting, pleaded to her father to follow the ransom demands without police involvement. After consulting with the authorities, Parker was given permission to meet with the kidnapper alone and without police monitoring, out of fear for his daughter's life. Another telegram arrived in the afternoon. It said, "P. Parker, please recover your senses. I want your money rather than kill your child, as so far you have given me no other alternative. Fox is my name, very sly, you know. Set no traps. I'll watch for them. Get this straight. Remember that life hangs by a thread. I have a razor ready, and I am able to handle the situation." It was signed Fate. The phone rang at 7:35 p.m. on December the 17th. The voice on the line instructing Parker to bring the certificates to a new agreed meeting place at West 5th Street and South Manhattan Place, adding that he would recognize Parker's car. By 8 p.m., Parker arrived ready to do whatever was necessary to bring his daughter home. As the desperate parent waited for the kidnapper to turn up, Chrysler Coupe pulled up slowly next to Parker's car. The man in the front seat had his face concealed with a scarf and was brandishing a handgun. The anxious father asked if Marion was all right and leant over to get a better look inside the car and saw his daughter slumped in the passenger seat with her eyes open, but making no movements. He called out to her, but got no response, assuming that she had perhaps been sedated. The bag containing the $20 certificates was handed over as agreed, and immediately after, the kidnapper put his vehicle into gear, moving the car forward and pushed Marion's body out of the passenger door before speeding away up the street. The alarmed Parker jumped out of his vehicle and ran to his daughter. He cradled his little girl and noticed that her face was pale. To his horror, this was not all, as she was lifeless. More horror was to come, as her eyes had been wired open to make it appear she was still alive. Realizing his daughter was deceased, Parker phoned the police. After Marion's body was recovered, an autopsy was done on the remains later that night. Dr. A. Wagner was scheduled to do the autopsy and was completely unaware of who it was on the slab until he arrived and was shocked to find it was the body of his neighbor's daughter. He was determined that the child had been dead for around 12 hours. Marion's arms and legs had been cut off and she had been disemboweled. Her lower torso stuffed with a towel and a man's shirt. Her eyes had been held open with piano wire to give the appearance that she was still alive. The following day, on the 18th, a man out walking his dog in Elysian Park spotted bundles wrapped in newspaper, tied with string, which were the severed arms and legs of a child. Covering the limbs, police positively identified them as belonging to Marion. At 620 Manhattan Street, a woman noticed a suitcase on her front lawn. It contained blood-soaked papers and a spool of piano wire, the same that the killer had used to sew Marion's eyes open. The police launched a nationwide hunt for the killer, involving more than 20,000 officers and volunteers. The gruesome details of Marion's murder had already been leaked to the press, leaving the people of Los Angeles both horrified and fearful for the safety of their own kids. The Parker family, along with other generous citizens, offered a $50,000 reward for the identification and capture of the murderer, dead or alive. This was later raised to $100,000 after numerous contributions from the public. On December the 20th, the getaway car in which Marion's killer had departed was found abandoned, having originally been stolen in San Diego. Police traced a laundry mark on the towel found stuffed inside Marion's torso to the Bellevue Arms apartments, where they interviewed a number of tenants. The fingerprints taken from the getaway car were identified as belonging to William Hickman, a former co-worker of Perry Parker. Both men were employed by the First National Bank of Los Angeles. The previous year, Hickman had been arrested on a complaint made by Parker regarding stolen and forged checks, totaling $400. He was convicted and sentenced to probation. Additional fingerprints lifted from the ransom letters were positively identified as Hickman's. It was subsequently discovered that Hickman had been a new resident of the Bellevue Arms, having moved into the building recently under the alias Donald Evans. A search of the flat found bloody footprints, indicating evidence of a crime. The police also found partly burnt handwritten drafts of ransom letters, as well as newspaper clippings about the kidnapping. Residents of the Bellevue Arms told police that during their initial combing of the building, Hickman had not been home and hence had not been encountered by law enforcement. Handwriting on the ransom notes matched those found inside the vehicle, and fingerprints corresponded with William Hickman's from a prior arrest. The 19-year-old had worked as a messenger at the same bank where Perry Parker was. His photograph was immediately circulated in newspapers and sent to every police department along the West Coast. During the early stages of the investigation, officers had no clues on the fugitive's whereabouts. They finally picked up on the trail as Hickman traveled throughout the Pacific Northwest over several days, relying on possible sightings in Albany, Portland, and Seattle, where he paid shopkeepers with gold certificates from the ransom. A petrol station attendant in Oregon reported seeing a man resembling Hickman driving a green Hudson. Shortly after, a $20 gold certificate was used to buy cold weather clothing, suggesting that Hickman had traveled north with the ransom money. Police in the region were placed on high alert, anticipating his next move. Around 7:30 a.m. on December the 22nd, Fred King, a petrol station proprietor in Portland, spotted Hickman at his service station. King immediately reported the sighting to police, indicating that Hickman had driven away, heading east, in the direction of the Columbia River Gorge. Police officers were stationed on all roads leading east of Portland. Hickman later admitted a few days earlier he had disposed of his California number plates, replacing them with two from Seattle he had stolen from a car the day before. Police officers, Gurdane and Lou Allen, were taking a coffee break in the town of Echo when an unmistakable green Hudson sped past them. They both gave chase, eventually catching up with the stolen vehicle after 2 miles. They drew their weapons as the driver made a half-hearted attempt to flee before finally pulling over. When the driver, who they recognized from wanted posters, turned out to be Hickman, he was arrested and offered no resistance, simply shrugging and remarking, "Well, I guess it's all over." The police also recovered $1,400 for the stolen ransom, which Hickman claimed he wanted in order to pay his way through college. When Parker learned of the arrest, he told reporters, "I feel a sense of deep and sincere thankfulness that this man has been captured and that mothers no longer need to fear that he may carry off their children." While detained at the county jail, Hickman confessed to helping participate in Marion's kidnapping, but implicated two other men, brothers Oliver and Frank Kramer, as accomplices, who carried out the crime. Hickman told an extensive story in which he claimed to have participated in a kidnapping plot with the Kramers. He took responsibility for the telegrams and phone calls, but maintained that it was the Kramers who had actually carried out the murder. This was not actually true, as the Kramer brothers had been in prison for several months on other charges. It was subsequently determined that Hickman knew the brothers through one of their girlfriends, with whom he was acquainted, and was aware that both of the men had criminal histories. The police surmised Hickman attempted to implicate them on this basis and found that they were satisfied that neither of the Kramer men or their girlfriends were aware of or involved in Marion's abduction and murder. Hickman immediately admitted to the kidnapping, and following his arrest, LAPD extradited him back to California. During the journey by train, he made two half-hearted suicide attempts, acts later understood to be designed to convince his guards, and eventually the court, that he was insane. Thousands of curious onlookers gathered at stations along the train's route, eager to catch a glimpse of the murderer who had dominated the previous week's headlines. Hickman waved and even smiled at the crowds. During the trip, he wrote a 19-page confession detailing the murder of Marion Parker, claiming that his motive had been to obtain tuition money so he could attend college. He enjoyed the notoriety. Later, he was paraded in front of spectators at Pendleton Jail and interviewed by countless reporters, and he couldn't keep his mouth shut and seemed to bask in the spotlight. Hickman later said that he and Marion had actually got on very well, and he had only killed her once she realized who he was, as the two had met before when she accompanied her father to work. He claimed he strangled her and dismembered her body to make it easier to conceal. Then he realized that Parker wouldn't pay for a child who was dead, so he filled her full of towels and sewed her eyes open to give the appearance of life. He also confessed to the murder of Clarence Toms, which he had committed during a store holdup with the help of 15-year-old Welby Hunt, as well as a number of other armed robberies. Further details about Marion's murder, which Hickman disclosed in a written confession after realizing his claims regarding the Kramer brothers had been disproven. He recounted that the child's last days in captivity, the little girl began to get restless. She had been blindfolded and tied to a chair, and on December the 17th, He went to post a ransom letter. When he returned, Marion demanded he free her. She had started to scream and shout, and Hickman feared she might attract attention. Lacing a towel around her neck, he strangled her as she squirmed and flailed for a number of minutes before she went quiet and limp. The child was then dragged to his bathroom. He proceeded to hang her body upside down in his bathtub, slicing her throat at the jugular vein to drain the body of blood. After disarticulating her arms and legs, he proceeded to disembowel her. He subsequently wrapped Marion's limbs in newspaper before temporarily storing her torso in a suitcase. Later that night, realizing that the father might want to physically see his daughter before paying the ransom, he attempted to reconstruct and disguise Marion's body to make it appear that she was alive. Revenge was not the motive. Prosecutors speculated that he wanted revenge against Marion's father for having testified against him in his earlier trial for theft and forgery. There is evidence that Hickman committed the murder, in part, for the notoriety it would bring, perhaps emulating the famous Leopold and Loeb murder of the child Bobby Franks, which we covered in Case 74, which is available on our back catalogue on YouTube under Season 8. The trial began on January the 25th, 1928. The not guilty by reason of insanity defense was relatively new in California. During the trial, he would mumble to himself in his cell and feign deafness when spoken to. Adding to the complexity of the case, the accused confessed to the murder of pharmacist Clarence Toms during a hold-up with his accomplice, Welby Hunt. Attorney Jerome Walsh represented Hickman and supported the insanity defense, calling on mental health experts, friends, and family members to testify to Hickman's alleged insanity. The accused told his attorney that he had killed Marion on the direction of a supernatural deity he called Providence. This claim was touted by Hickman's defense lawyer in court, who attempted to explain his actions by reason of insanity. The district attorney was determined to counter this strategy and hired a team of psychiatrists to argue that Hickman was fully sane when he murdered Marion Parker. Evidence contradicting his insanity defense included testimony from prison guards, who said that the prisoner asked them how he could act crazy during his incarceration. Dr. McCary, a psychologist who examined Hickman in jail, observed that his mind seemed clear and he told a straight, coherent story and was never at a loss for words. There was nothing about him to indicate insanity. On February the 9th, Hickman was found guilty of first-degree murder by the jury, who had deliberated for 36 minutes, and sentenced to death by hanging. After the verdict, the convict told the press, "I don't think that I have much to live for, and I don't know yet why I killed that Parker girl, but I did it, and I will take my punishment." An appeal to the California Supreme Court was unsuccessful. In March, Hickman and Welby Hunt were found guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Clarence Toms. The two both received life terms after the jurors recommended mercy for each of them. Hunt was released on parole in March 1939. Another quote from Hickman said, "If they shouldn't hang me, then they never should hang another man. My crime was one of the most gruesome in history." On October the 29th, 1928, in San Quentin prison, before guards marched him to the gallows, Hickman ate a chicken dinner and listened to music. He read letters from his mother and broke down once in tears. He walked up the steps to the scaffold and almost fainted as the executioner placed a black hood over his head. When the trapdoor opened, he struck his head on the edge of the gap and dangled for several minutes before becoming motionless, and the doctor pronounced him dead. It was found after his execution that his neck did not break during the hanging, and that he had died from asphyxia.